The bustling streets of Beijing hummed with the familiar, frantic energy of a Monday morning, but for Lin Yong, the world felt entirely suspended in time. Walking out of the revolving glass doors of the architectural firm, he clutched a leather portfolio tightly against his chest, his mind still racing over the blueprints he had spent the entire weekend refining. Years had passed since the bittersweet days of their university campus, years carved out by silent departures, missed phone calls, and the heavy, lingering ache of unsaid words. Yet, the moment the crisp autumn wind brushed against his face carrying a faint trace of familiar jasmine perfume, his heart betrayed him, skipping a beat with a sudden, breathless intensity that felt terrifyingly like the past. Across the sprawling, sun-drenched plaza, Lu Ji stopped dead in her tracks, her hand instinctively rising to steady the strap of her canvas bag as her breath caught in her throat. She had come to this district for a routine site inspection for her upcoming gallery exhibition, never expecting the kaleidoscope of memories to shatter her carefully constructed emotional armor in a single, unyielding second. Through the sea of hurried commuters in heavy coats and tailored suits, her eyes locked onto a tall, familiar silhouette standing near the fountain. Time seemed to fold inward, collapsing the distance of oceans and years, leaving only the sharp, electric recognition of two souls who had once meant everything to each other. Neither of them moved for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed by the sheer weight of an unexpected reunion they had both secretly prayed for yet desperately feared. Lin Yang's shoes felt glued to the paved stone, his fingers trembling slightly against the leather of his portfolio as he took in the subtle changes in her. The way her hair now fell in soft, sophisticated waves, the mature grace etched into her posture, and the depth in those familiar eyes that had once held all his youthful dreams. Lu Ji felt the warmth rush to her cheeks, a constellation of long-suppressed emotions, regret, relief, and an overwhelming, undeniable fondness, flooding her chest with a warmth that threatened to melt the winter she had built around her heart. The distance between them shrank with the first hesitant step Lin Yong took forward, breaking the spell of hesitation that had held them captive for so long. With every pace he closed the gap, the chaotic noise of the city faded into a distant, muted hum, replaced entirely by the sound of his own racing heartbeat and the rhythm of his approaching footsteps. Lu Ji watched him come closer, her vision blurring slightly with unshed tears that she fought bravely to keep at bay, her lips parting in a breathless whisper of his name that was instantly swallowed by the bustling autumn wind. When they finally stood mere inches apart, the air between them grew charged with a delicate, fragile tension, as if the slightest movement might shatter the illusion of this reality. Lin Yong lifted his gaze, meeting her luminous eyes, and in that silent exchange, all the unspoken apologies, the lonely nights of wondering, and the heavy burdens of their separate lives melted away into nothingness. He didn't offer a grand speech or a practiced greeting, instead, a soft, incredibly tender smile touched the corners of his lips, carrying with it the profound comfort of someone who had finally found his way back home. "You haven't changed at all," Lu Ji finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly with emotion as her hand reached out, hovering in the air for a brief second before gently touching the lapel of his coat to reassure herself he was truly there. "Neither have you, even if you tried to pretend you did," Lin Yong replied, his voice deep and warm, wrapping around her like a cozy blanket on a freezing night. The casual banter acted as a magical key, unlocking the heavy doors of their past and inviting them back into the easy camaraderie that had once defined their friendship before life complicated everything. Without a second thought, Lin Yong reached out and took her hand, his fingers automatically interlacing with hers as if they had never spent years apart in different time zones and conflicting realities. Together, they walked away from the crowded plaza, seeking out a quiet, hidden cafe tucked away in a narrow alleyway where the ghosts of their youth could finally rest in peace. The cafe was a sanctuary of warm amber lighting, the gentle aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans, and the soft strains of a jazz record playing quietly in the background. They chose a corner booth by the window, the tall glass pane offering a cinematic view of the golden leaves fluttering down from the ancient ginkgo trees outside. As they settled into the plush velvet seats, the initial shock of the reunion began to give way to a nervous, fluttering curiosity about the paths they had walked while apart. "So, an architect," Lu Ji murmured with a gentle smile, tracing the rim of her porcelain teacup as the waiter quietly set down their steaming orders. "You actually turned those messy sketches from our dorm room drafting table into real buildings." "It took longer than I expected, and a lot of sleepless nights fueled by instant noodles, but I managed," Lin Yong chuckled softly, leaning back and resting his arms on the table. "And you, I saw the posters for your solo exhibition plastered all over the subway stations. You finally made it to the grand stage." "It's been a whirlwind," Lu Ji admitted, looking down at her hands with a modest, self-deprecating shrug. Success has a funny way of keeping you busy, but it leaves a lot of quiet hours at the end of the night when the studio lights go out. The admission hung in the air, a subtle acknowledgement of the loneliness they had both endured while chasing their respective ambitions across the globe. Lin Yong felt a sharp pang of empathy in his chest, remembering the exact night she had told him about her fellowship abroad, a moment when their youth and stubborn pride had forced them onto divergent tracks. He reached across the wooden table, his fingers gently brushing against her knuckles, offering a silent reassurance that spoke volumes louder than any apology could ever manage. "You don't have to carry that quietness alone anymore," Lin Yong said softly, his dark eyes unwavering and filled with a sincerity that made her breath hitch. Lu Ji looked up, meeting his steady gaze, and felt the last remaining walls of her defenses crumble entirely under the warmth of his unconditional regard. She realized then that no matter how much time had passed or how many cities she had lived in, this man had remained the emotional anchor she never truly learned how to let go of. The conversation effortlessly shifted from polite catching up to the deep, rambling banter of their youth, filled with inside jokes, shared memories, and the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other's souls. Hours slipped away unnoticed as the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the wooden floorboards of the cafe and painting the room in hues of amber and rose. They talked about everything and nothing, their favorite childhood movies, the absurd quirks of their current coworkers, and the dreams they were still desperately trying to conquer. It felt as though the intervening years were merely a brief intermission in a play that had always been destined to continue. When they finally stepped back out onto the pavement, the evening chill had settled over the city, wrapping the bustling streets in a mesmerizing cloak of neon lights and shimmering reflections from the recent rain. Without needing to discuss it, Lin Yong gently slipped his arm around her shoulders to shield her from the cool breeze, and Lu Ji leaned into his side naturally, finding an immediate and profound sense of peace. They walked aimlessly through the familiar neighborhood where they had spent countless afternoons sharing ice cream and debating the meaning of life. Every street corner held a memory, a silent witness to the dreams they had whispered into the night air when the future was still an unwritten blank page waiting for their ink. They stopped by the old convenience store where they used to buy midnight snacks during finals week, laughing as the elderly shopkeeper squinted through his thick glasses and instantly recognized them. It was as if the universe had decided to rewind the clock, granting them a second chance to heal the fractures of their past. Yet, as the night deepened, the reality of their present lives began to gently knock on the door of their enchanting bubble, reminding them of early morning flights, major architectural deadlines, and gallery openings. They found themselves standing outside the entrance of Lu Ji's apartment building, the towering brick structure suddenly feeling far too close to the end of their magical evening. The easy laughter that had sustained them all afternoon slowly faded into a tender, reluctant quietness as they faced the impending moment of separation. "I have an early meeting with the overseas contractors tomorrow morning," Lin Yong said quietly, his hand lingering on the strap of her bag as if hoping to delay the inevitable tick of the clock. "And I have to prep the gallery space for the VIP preview before the weekend," Lu Ji added, her voice carrying a hint of genuine sadness that she made no effort to disguise. "This isn't going to be another goodbye where we lose each other for years, is it?" Lin Yong asked, his gaze searching her face with a sudden vulnerability that laid his entire heart bare. Lu Ji smiled, a radiant expression that outshone the harsh glow of the street lamp overhead, and shook her head slowly from side to side. She reached up, her palm resting gently against his warm cheek, feeling the familiar stubble of his beard and anchoring herself to the reality of his presence. "Never again," she promised softly, her voice steady and full of a quiet, unshakable conviction. "We've wasted enough years wondering, what if? From now on, we write the story as it happens." Lin Yang's expression softened into an immensely relieved smile, and he leaned down, pressing a lingering, tender kiss to her forehead that held the promise of countless tomorrows. They lingered for a few more moments in the quiet embrace of the night, letting the rhythm of each other's breathing wash away the lingering doubts of the past. As Lu Ji finally turned and walked through the glass doors of her building, she looked back one last time to see Lin Yong standing faithfully on the sidewalk, watching her with a gaze that promised he would still be there when the sun came up. The following weeks transformed into a delicate, beautiful dance of balancing demanding careers and rediscovering the rhythm of each other's daily lives. Text messages filled with hurried sketches and coffee cup emojis bridged the gap between morning meetings and late-night gallery preparations, turning ordinary workdays into something to look forward to. They learned to steal hours from their hectic schedules, sharing quick lunches at food trucks parked outside construction sites, taking midnight strolls along the riverbank, and sitting together in comfortable silence while working on their respective laptops. One Friday evening, as a gentle autumn drizzle began to slick the asphalt of the city streets, Lin Yong surprised Lu Ji by picking her up outside her studio in a sleek vintage car she had admired once during their college days. He didn't tell her where they were going, only offering a mysterious, boyish grin that made her heart flutter just as it had years ago. They drove out of the bustling city center and up into the winding hills overlooking the glittering expanse of the metropolitan skyline, where the city lights twinkled like fallen stars against the velvet canvas of the night. He parked near an abandoned scenic overlook that offered a panoramic view of the entire urban sprawl, a spot they had visited once during a miserable rainy night when they were both struggling to figure out their futures. Back then, they had sat in a beat-up sedan, sharing a single umbrella and dreaming of conquering the world. Now, standing beneath the shelter of the car's open tailgate with a thermos of hot cocoa, they looked out at the sprawling empire of lights they had both successfully navigated. "Look at how far we've come," Lin Yong murmured, his arm wrapping around her waist as they watched the distant traffic flow like rivers of gold and ruby through the concrete canyons. "And look at where we ended up," Lu Ji added softly, leaning her head against his shoulder and listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart. "Right back where we started, but stronger." Lin Yong turned her gently to face him, the amber light from the dashboard casting a soft glow over his expressive features as he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, worn sketchbook, the very same one they used to pass back and forth during boring lectures, filled with architectural doodles, clumsy portraits, and half-finished poetry. He handed it to her, and as she flipped open the cover, she found a brand new page right at the end, filled with a detailed, beautiful sketch of the very cafe where they had reunited weeks ago, signed with today's date. "I never stopped drawing us into my blueprints," Lin Yong confessed quietly, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down into her startled, shining eyes. "Every building I design, every space I create, I always subconsciously leave a room for you." Tears spilled over Lu Ji's lashes, not of sadness or regret, but of an overwhelming, heart-bursting joy that finally cleared away every shadow of the past. She closed the sketchbook, holding it tightly against her chest before throwing her arms around his neck, pulling him into a desperate, passionate embrace that spoke of all the love they had kept locked away for too long. Lin Yong caught her effortlessly, burying his face in her hair and breathing in her familiar jasmine scent, knowing with absolute certainty that his life had finally found its true north. The days that followed felt like a masterclass